I'm Emily Johnson, and at 32, I had meticulously built a successful career in the cutthroat world of finance. But none of it could buy me the one thing I wanted most, my father's approval. This year's family reunion was approaching, and the tension felt heavier than ever. So I did the unthinkable. I bought him a brand new Mercedes S-Class as a peace offering. But even that wasn't enough. He still found a way to make me feel small and publicly ashamed. That's when I reached into my purse and pulled out an envelope with just one document inside. A truth I had been blind to my entire life. And that night, I finally understood why I was never enough for him. Before I share my story, let me know where you're watching from and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever stood in front of someone who made you feel small. My story might be the one you need to hear today. Growing up in an affluent Boston suburb, our family, the Johnson clan, was a carefully constructed facade of perfection to the outside world. From a distance, we were the epitome of WASP success, manicured lawns, prestigious schools, and an air of quiet, undeniable wealth. But behind the closed doors of our sprawling colonial, the reality was a stark, discomfiting contrast. My father, Robert Johnson, was a self-made titan. He had painstakingly built his real estate development company from modest beginnings into a multi-million-dollar corporation, a testament to his relentless drive and unwavering focus. He was a man who worshipped at the altar of success status and respect. These were the gods he served, and tragically, they took precedence over all else, even the messy, unpredictable, inconvenient intricacies of family relationships. From my earliest memories, he was never the kind of father you saw in storybooks. He was never the kind of father who attended school plays or helped with homework. He was the harsh critic, the omnipresent auditor of my performance, forever poised to point out the perceived cracks in my carefully constructed facade of achievement. A B+ on a report card was a stark reminder that it should have been an A. Not being chosen as team captain was a failure to seize leadership. Second place. That was just the first loser, the most painful spell he delivered with a cutting smile that seared itself into my nascent self-esteem. My mother, Olivia, was in so many ways his antithesis. When he wasn't around, she was warmth personified. A soft touch, an encouraging whisper, a comforting embrace that spoke volumes of unspoken affection. But in his presence, she transformed. It was as if she physically shrank, her vibrant energy dimming, her confident voice receding into a quiet murmur. She never contradicted him. Never. Not once did she stand up for us kids when his criticism, sharp and relentless, veered into outright cruelty. It was a dynamic I didn't fully comprehend in my younger years, this strange, almost hypnotic power he held over her. The way her eyes, luminous and expressive, would dart to him before she dared answer even the simplest questions about dinner plans or weekend activities. It was a silent, unsettling ballet of submission that played out in the background of our childhood, a constant, unspoken lesson in hierarchy and deference. My siblings and I grew up within the confines of this complicated, emotionally charged family structure, each of us finding our own precarious footing. My older brother David, 3 years my senior, was undeniably the golden child, a fact so self-evident it rarely needed verbal confirmation. He glided through life with an effortless grace that baffled me. He played football with a natural athleticism that secured him a spot on the varsity team, made the honor roll with consistent ease, and dated the right girls from the right families. And of course, he followed our father directly into the real estate business after graduating from Dad's alma mater, a path as predestined as a royal succession. Everything seemed to come effortlessly to David, or at least that's how it appeared to me. He seemed to intuitively understand what would please our father, a secret language of approval that I, no matter how hard I tried, could never seem to decipher. Then there was Taylor, my younger sister, 2 years, my junior. She possessed a different kind of magic, a quiet, almost supernatural ability to navigate the murky waters of our father's approval system, far better than I ever could. She wasn't the relentless overachiever that David was, nor did she pursue the traditional paths of corporate success that I did. Instead, she had a natural charm, an innate grace, and an almost uncanny knack for reading the room, for knowing precisely when to speak and when to melt into the background. Taylor became the family peacemaker, the gentle mediator who could on rare occasions coax a genuine laugh from our father, even when his mood had darkened into its familiar oppressive gloom. It was Taylor who would slip into my room after particularly brutal criticism sessions, her presence a soft balm, assuring me with a quiet, unwavering conviction that it wasn't as bad as it seemed. Her words, though often not entirely true, offered a fleeting moment of comfort. But even Taylor's quiet comfort couldn't erase the persistent gnawing truth for me, Emily. Nothing was ever enough. My efforts, my accomplishments, no matter how significant, seemed to evaporate into the thin air of my father's skepticism. I secured a full academic scholarship to Cornell, a monumental achievement that, in my father's eyes, was a direct act of defiance. He had pushed relentlessly for me to attend his alma mater, seeing my choice as a rejection of his legacy, a deliberate turning away from the path he had meticulously laid out. The argument had been brutal, a verbal wrestling match I ultimately won, but at the cost of another layer of his distant approval. During college, while my peers were reveling in the freedom of campus life, I worked 2 part-time jobs, fueling my relentless pursuit of academic excellence, while maintaining a GPA that would make lesser mortals weep. Yet when I returned home for breaks exhausted but proud, his only questions were why I wasn't interning at more prestigious companies, why I hadn't leveraged my connections to secure a more impressive summer experience. The invisible scorecard in his mind was always blank for me, waiting for some unattainable entry. After graduation, the predictable offer came, a half-hearted suggestion that I join his real estate company. I refused without hesitation, a decision that felt both terrifying and liberating. I knew with an absolute certainty that chilled me to the bone that I would never be seen as anything but a pity hire, an object of his reluctant charity forever shadowed. So with little more than 2 suitcases overflowing with cheap clothes and a steely, unyielding determination, I packed up my life and moved to New York City. I slept on a friend's futon in a cramped, airless apartment, the unfamiliar sounds of the city, a constant hum outside the window, while I applied to every financial firm I could find, sending out resumes into the vast, indifferent void of the corporate world. So with little more than 2 suitcases overflowing with cheap clothes and a steely, unyielding determination, I packed up my life and moved to New York City. I slept on a friend's futon in a cramped, airless apartment, the unfamiliar sounds of the city, a constant hum outside the window, while I applied to every financial firm I could find, sending out resumes into the vast, indifferent void of the corporate world. When against all odds, I finally landed an entry-level position at Goldman Sachs, the news felt like a seismic shift, a crack in the impenetrable wall of his indifference. His response, a clipped, dismissive, "Let's see if you last a month." The words were a gauntlet thrown, a challenge that ignited a fierce, unyielding fire within me. I did last. Not just a month, but 8 grueling, exhilarating years. I worked my way up, clawing my way through the ranks without the benefit of family connections or the corrosive influence of nepotism. My drive was fueled partly by a genuine passion for the complexities of finance, for the intricate dance of markets, and the challenge of strategic investment. But I admit it was also profoundly, desperately fueled by a burning, primal need to prove him wrong, to shove my successes in the face of his perpetual doubt. Just last month, the validation I craved seemed within reach. I had received a major promotion to senior investment strategist, becoming the youngest person in the firm's history to hold such a prestigious position. The salary bump was substantial, a tangible testament to my hard work, finally allowing me to purchase my dream apartment in Manhattan, a sleek modern space with panoramic city views that felt like a sanctuary of my own making, and still have a significant amount of savings left over. It was with a portion of those hard-won savings that I made what I, in my naive, hopeful heart, believed would be a grand gesture. I purchased a brand-new Mercedes S-Class for my father for Father's Day. In my elaborate, almost cinematic fantasy, this gift, this extravagant symbol of my financial success, would finally irrevocably make him see me as successful, as worthy of his approval, as a daughter he could finally be proud of. The car cost nearly a year of my substantial salary, a sum that would have made any rational person balk. But I convinced myself with a desperate, self-delusional fervor that it would be worth every penny if it meant finally hearing those elusive words, "I'm proud of you, Emily." Looking back now with the cold clarity of hindsight and the sharp sting of reality, I can see how utterly pathetic that need for validation truly was. It wasn't just a desire. It was an obsession, a relentless pursuit that had subtly, insidiously shaped every major decision in my life. My achievements, those carefully constructed pillars of professional success, weren't truly for me for my own intrinsic satisfaction. They were weapons meticulously sharpened and wielded in an unwinnable war for his affection, a battle I was destined to lose from the start. When I bought that car, I wasn't merely acquiring a luxury vehicle. I was attempting to purchase something every child inherently deserves, freely given a parent's unconditional love. The realization now after the fact was a bitter pill to swallow. The annual Johnson family reunion, an unyielding fixture on our calendar, always fell on the last weekend in June. Conveniently, or perhaps strategically, this placed it precariously close to Father's Day, transforming the gathering into a dual celebration of Robert Johnson's patriarchal status. This year was slated to be no different, a meticulously choreographed display of family unity and corporate prowess. Except, of course, for my absurdly expensive interjection, that sleek black Mercedes S-Class, replete with all the premium features my father had once casually but pointedly mentioned admiring at a country club friend's home. As the date approached, my anxiety spiraled to dizzying new heights. It was a familiar pattern, a well-worn path in my emotional landscape, yet this time it felt sharper, more intense. I spent 3 excruciating weekends shopping for the perfect outfit, a sartorial battleground where I wrestled with contradictory expectations. It had to scream successful, yet not appear as if I were trying too hard. It needed to be feminine, but certainly not frivolous. The impossible contradictory mix my father seemed to expect from women who dared to venture into the world of business. I finally settled on a navy blue tailored dress from a designer my mother had once mentioned he respected, accessorized with subtle gold jewelry and shoes that were expensive but not flashy. The familiar pattern of preparation felt pathetic, even as I participated in it, the desperate routine of a child still seeking approval at 32 years old. Past reunions flashed through my mind like a rapid-fire montage, as I packed each one marked by some form of paternal disappointment, a new layer added to the edifice of his disapproval. When I was 16 and had, against all odds, won the state math competition, a triumph that filled me with a quiet personal pride, he had dismissed it with a wave of his hand, questioning why I wasn't focusing more on debate, since numbers people are easy to find. When I graduated college, summa cum laude, his only comment, delivered with a sigh that spoke volumes, was that my chosen field was unstable compared to real estate. My first substantial bonus at Goldman, a tangible reward for countless sleepless nights, resulted in him wondering aloud if finance was really just glorified gambling. And my first promotion, the culmination of years of relentless effort, led to pointed questions about whether I'd been selected to fill a gender quota. Nothing, it seemed, was ever an achievement on its own merits. It was always tainted, always undermined by his skepticism, his unspoken suggestion that my success was either accidental, flawed, or simply not good enough. But this year, this particular reunion carried an additional, more profound complication, one that had violently rocked the very foundations of my identity just 3 months earlier. A popular genetic testing service, one I'd used out of simple curiosity about my ancestry, had delivered a result that was not just unexpected, but earth-shattering. The genetic markers, the intricate blueprint of my very being, simply didn't align with being Robert Johnson's biological daughter. After the initial shock, a disorienting blend of disbelief, and a strange nascent sense of explanation, I'd quietly pursued a more definitive test. During a brief tense visit home, I had surreptitiously obtained DNA samples from my father's hairbrush, my hands trembling as I worked. The results were conclusive, and now they sat in a sealed, unassuming envelope deep within my purse. A nuclear option, a truth bomb I hadn't yet decided whether to deploy its potential fallout. Terrifying and irresistible. The discovery explained so much, illuminating a lifetime of nagging inconsistencies and unacknowledged pain. The lifelong unsettling feeling of being an outsider in my own family, a quiet observer of dynamics I didn't quite belong to. The subtle physical differences, the way my features didn't quite mirror those of my siblings. Differences no one in the family ever acknowledged, yet I felt them acutely. And most profoundly, the inexplicable coldness from a man who, despite his demanding nature, showed at least basic grudging affection to his other children. A chilling suspicion had begun to form, solidifying into a certainty he knew. He had always known. And that secret knowledge, that silent, festering truth, had colored every single interaction we'd ever had, tainting every glance, every word, every subtle gesture. The day before the reunion, I drove the new Mercedes to my parents' suburban Boston home. I had meticulously arranged for its delivery to a nearby dealership, ensuring discretion. My presentation plan was carefully orchestrated, arriving mid-afternoon precisely when Mother would be at her garden club meeting, guaranteeing a private moment for this carefully constructed peace offering. My father answered the door, his usual crisp business casual attire, perfectly pressed despite it being a Saturday. He looked mildly annoyed by the interruption, his brow furrowed slightly. "Emily, you're early. The reunion isn't until tomorrow," he said, checking his watch with an air of mild exasperation, as if I'd missed a meticulously scheduled appointment. "I know, Dad," I replied, my voice steady, despite the frantic pounding of my heart. "I actually brought your Father's Day gift early and wanted to give it to you privately." I extended a small, elegantly wrapped box, the unmistakable Mercedes emblem clearly visible through the cellophane. He opened it with the polite, detached manner he reserved for obligatory gifts, his expression shifting from mild irritation to a fleeting moment of surprise as he recognized the distinctive logo. My father answered the door, his usual crisp business casual attire, perfectly pressed despite it being a Saturday. He looked mildly annoyed by the interruption, his brow furrowed slightly. "Emily, you're early. The reunion isn't until tomorrow," he said, checking his watch with an air of mild exasperation, as if I'd missed a meticulously scheduled appointment. "I know, Dad," I replied, my voice steady despite the frantic pounding of my heart. "I actually brought your Father's Day gift early and wanted to give it to you privately." I extended a small, elegantly wrapped box, the unmistakable Mercedes emblem clearly visible through the cellophane. He opened it with the polite, detached manner he reserved for obligatory gifts, his expression shifting from mild irritation to a fleeting moment of surprise as he recognized the distinctive logo. "Is this some kind of joke?" he asked, his voice betraying a hint of genuine confusion. I guided him to the front window where the brand new car sat gleaming in the driveway, its black paintwork shimmering under the afternoon sun. His face registered genuine shock, a flicker of something almost like pleasure, a rare softening of his perpetually analytical expression. But it faded quickly, replaced by his usual guarded, critical gaze. "This is excessive, Emily. What are you trying to prove?" he asked, though he was already moving toward the front door, the key clutched in his hand. "Nothing," I lied, the word tasting bitter on my tongue. "I got a big promotion, and I wanted to do something special for you." He circled the car, twice his movements precise and deliberate, examining it with the same discerning eye he might apply to a property investment. He noted its features, asked pointed questions about financing and insurance that felt more like an interrogation than an expression of gratitude. After a brief test drive, during which he commented that the steering felt a bit loose despite the car's renowned handling, he parked it in the garage, rather than leaving it in the driveway where arriving guests might see it. His thanks were perfunctory, delivered as an afterthought, immediately followed by a comment that I must be doing well to waste money like this. His words, as always, were precisely chosen, effectively, cutting the legs out from under my grand gesture, leaving it lying limp and lifeless at my feet. That evening, alone in my hotel room, I called my best friend Taylor, the familiar sting of his dismissal, raw and burning. I recounted the cold reception, the crushing disappointment. "You know what, forget him," Taylor said, her voice laced with the righteous anger of a friend who had heard too many similar stories. Too many tales of my father's emotional cruelty. "Take the car back. He doesn't deserve it." I dismissed the suggestion, still clinging to a thread of hope that tomorrow would be different, that in front of others he might finally show appreciation, might finally see me, truly see me. "Just promise me you won't show him that test," Taylor warned, her voice serious before hanging up. "Not unless you're prepared for nuclear fallout," I promised. But the envelope, heavy with its explosive truth, remained tucked securely in my purse, a secret weapon I both feared and couldn't quite relinquish. Sunday afternoon arrived cloaked in perfect June weather, a cruel irony of sunny skies and a gentle breeze, as if the environment itself was conspiring to create the illusion of the perfect family gathering. I took the long route to my parents' sprawling estate, using the scenic drive to mentally rehearse confident responses to the inevitable questions about my personal life, my career trajectory, my alarming lack of a husband or children at the ancient age of 32, My knuckles were white on the steering wheel as I turned onto the familiar maple-lined driveway, already half filled with the gleaming luxury cars belonging to extended family, and inevitably my father's business associates, who somehow always made the invite list for supposedly intimate family gatherings. And then I spotted it, the Mercedes I'd gifted him prominently displayed near the front entrance, rather than tucked away in its garage spot from yesterday. Strategically positioned, of course, where arriving guests couldn't possibly miss it. A silent, gleaming monument to his perceived success. Taking a deep breath, I smoothed the fabric of my tailored navy dress, checked my makeup one final time in the rearview mirror, and strode toward the imposing front door with the practiced confidence I'd developed in boardrooms filled with men who consistently underestimated me. Mother answered, her face lighting up with genuine warmth as she enveloped me in a soft, perfumed embrace. "You look beautiful, darling," she whispered, her voice laced with a gentle affection that always felt like a temporary reprieve. Then almost immediately she added her standard, "Your father's in the back garden with the Peterson group." Her tone a subtle weather warning, a quiet instruction to prepare for the inevitable storm. The grand foyer was already crowded with relatives, a familiar mix of actual family and my father's carefully curated collection of connections. Business partners, influential clients, and community leaders, who were treated as honorary members of the Johnson clan. Aunt Linda, mother's sister, approached immediately, a flurry of air kisses and rapid-fire questions about my non-existent love life. Uncle George, on the other hand, offered a hearty handshake and a booming, "There's our Wall Street wizard," which I knew with a practiced certainty would irritate my father if it drifted within earshot. Cousins, second cousins, and family friends swirled around in predictable patterns. The same conversations repeated annually with minor updates, everyone performing their assigned roles in the carefully orchestrated Johnson family theater. My father's entrance was, as expected, choreographed to perfection. He walked in from the garden flanked by 3 business associates, all of them laughing at something that was surely only moderately amusing, but treated as hilariously profound due to the speaker's net worth. His eyes swept the room, acknowledging various guests with practiced nods and brief, almost imperceptible greetings until they landed on me. The flicker of recognition was instantaneous, followed by the briefest tightening of his lips, a subtle contraction that spoke volumes. Then he nodded exactly as he had to distant relatives and peripheral acquaintances, and walked toward Mother to murmur something in her ear. No particular greeting for me, his middle child, the daughter who had just gifted him an automobile, worth more than most people's annual salaries. I pretended not to notice, engaging in conversation with my cousin Rachel about her medical residency, but the familiar excruciating sting of dismissal burned all the same. Mother materialized at my side moments later, her hand touching my arm gently, a silent apology in her touch. "Darling, your father mentioned you brought a new car for him. How incredibly generous," she said, her eyes communicating a complex mixture of gratitude for my thoughtfulness and concern about the sheer extravagance of the gift. "Please come say hello to the Stevensons. They just got back from a financial conference in Singapore and would love your insights." This was Mother's way, always running interference, creating social buffers, manufacturing reasons for interactions that should by all rights come naturally between family members. David arrived fashionably late, as was his custom, making an entrance with his perfect wife Rebecca, and their 2 perfect, impeccably behaved children. He immediately received the warm paternal embrace, the proud slap on the back, the unadulterated paternal approval I'd spent decades trying and failing to earn. "Dad, the new car is insane. When did you decide to upgrade?" David asked, his voice filled with admiration. I watched, a silent observer of my own erasure, as my father clapped him on the shoulder and responded, his voice thick with a self-congratulatory pride. "Sometimes you need to treat yourself, son. Success has its privileges." There was no mention of the gift, no acknowledgement of my contribution, no flicker of recognition that I was the source of this magnificent new acquisition. Taylor, ever perceptive, intercepted me before I could fully process this blatant act of invisibility, pulling me into a genuine hug that lingered just long enough to communicate her silent understanding, her quiet sympathy. "I heard about your promotion. That's amazing, Liz. Seriously groundbreaking," she whispered, using my childhood nickname, the one no one else used anymore, the one that felt like a secret language between us. Her sincerity was a balm, a gentle poultice on the fresh wound of my father's indifference, but the sharp contrast only highlighted the chasm between us. As appetizers circulated, carried by the discreet hired staff, I noticed my father leading a group of his business associates toward the front drive, gesturing animatedly through the large bay windows. I could see him showing off the Mercedes, opening the doors, pointing out the features, his face alive with a vivid, unadulterated pride I'd never once seen directed at me, never once seen when he spoke of my accomplishments. "He's been doing that all morning," Taylor murmured, appearing at my elbow, a glass of wine in her hand, which I gratefully accepted. 3 separate tours for different groups of his cronies. "Mother told me you bought it for him." "That was incredibly generous, Liz." I sipped the wine, the bitter taste of my own desperate hope mixing with the dry notes of the Cabernet. I watched as my father settled into the driver's seat, inviting one of his associates to experience the passenger-side luxury, a grotesque parody of the moment I'd envisioned. Generosity wasn't my motivation, I admitted quietly, the words barely audible. Just once I wanted him to see me as successful, as worthy of notice. Pathetic, right? Taylor squeezed my arm, her touch firm and reassuring. "Not pathetic, human," she corrected gently. "But Liz, you need to understand." She hesitated, choosing her words with a careful precision, as if navigating a minefield. "Dad will never give you what you're looking for. It's not because you don't deserve it, but because he is incapable of it. Something in him is broken when it comes to you specifically." Her words, though not entirely new information, hit me with surprising force. Hearing someone else articulate the deeply ingrained, unspoken dynamic I'd experienced my entire life made it suddenly undeniably painfully real, in a way my private thoughts never had. The weight of the paternity test in my purse seemed to double the sealed envelope, a ticking bomb I both wanted to detonate and desperately hoped to contain. The hour before dinner unfolded with the predictable, suffocating rhythm of Johnson family gatherings. Everyone migrated to the formal living room, a space dominated by uncomfortable antique furniture and aggressively tasteful decor, meticulously selected by Mother, but of course approved by Father, the only domestic domain where his opinion truly reigned supreme. I positioned myself strategically on a window seat slightly removed from the main conversational circle, nursing a second glass of wine and observing the familiar family dynamics with a newfound clarity. The knowledge of my genetic otherness, the explosive truth nestled in my purse, created an almost anthropological detachment, allowing me to observe the performance with a chilling objectivity. David naturally commanded the center of attention, regaling the assembled family with meticulously rehearsed tales of his latest real estate acquisition. It was a struggling shopping complex, he explained with practiced confidence, that he planned to transform into luxury condominiums. The initial investment looked risky to my partners, but I saw the potential everyone else missed. He explained, his chest puffed with a barely contained pride. Our father, enthroned in his leather armchair, nodded approvingly, a smug satisfaction on his face. "That's the Johnson instinct," Father interjected proudly, his voice booming across the room. "Seeing opportunity where others see failure. It's in the blood." The irony of his statement wasn't lost on me. It landed with the dull thud of a physical blow. The phantom weight of the envelope in my purse grew heavier, with each blood-related claim, each assertion of an inherited legacy that, unbeknownst to them, I did not share. The conversation shifted inevitably in my direction as David concluded his self-congratulatory monologue. "Emily, Robert tells me you've moved up at your firm," my Uncle Robert remarked, genuine interest in his voice, a rare and welcome commodity in this room. "Senior investment strategist, isn't it impressive for someone your age?" Before I could respond, Father cleared his throat, a theatrical gesture that commanded attention. "It's a good stepping stone position," he conceded, his voice dismissive. "The financial sector is volatile, though, always has been, not like having something tangible like property." He turned toward David, his gaze softening, his tone shifting to one of genuine pride. "Real assets withstand market fluctuations. They persist through generations." The familiar dismissal stung despite my anticipation of it. The calculated pivot back to David and his real estate empire, the implied inferiority of my chosen career path, was a well-worn script. Actually, I began summoning the professional voice I reserved for difficult client meetings, the one that commanded respect and brooked no nonsense. My division generated 30% returns last quarter, outperforming the market by points during significant volatility. Our risk assessment model, which I developed, has been adopted company-wide. A moment of impressed silence followed, a rare chink in the armor of paternal dismissal. but it was quickly shattered. Father responded with a dismissive wave, a flick of his wrist that negated all my efforts. Numbers on paper, he scoffed. When the next recession hits, we'll see how that holds up. He then turned to his business associate, Henry, effectively erasing my presence from the conversation. Speaking of property values, what do you think of the zoning changes in the Cambridge corridor? I excused myself to refresh my drink, the metallic taste of anger rising in my throat. I encountered Taylor in the hallway as she returned from checking on her husband, who was valiantly watching the children in the backyard. "Don't let him get to you," she whispered, squeezing my arm, her eyes reflecting the same weariness I felt. "I heard about your model from Michael's cousin who works in finance. It's apparently revolutionary." Her validation, quiet and sincere, warmed me even as I realized how pathetic it was to still crave such simple acknowledgement. As I approached the bar setup in the dining room, my father's voice drifted from his adjoining study, the door slightly ajar. "The car, yes, quite an upgrade from the old model, Sa." He was saying, his voice resonating with an almost theatrical modesty. "When you work hard and build something from nothing, like I have, you earn these luxuries." The male voice responding belonged to Walter Peterson, father's longtime business rival, and sometimes ally, a man whose respect my father clearly coveted. "Robert, you old dog, always the modest one. Your daughter Emily mentioned she bought it for you when we chatted earlier. Said something about her promotion. Sounds like she's making quite a name for herself in New York." A brief, pregnant silence followed, during which I held my breath, bracing myself. Then father's response, each word precisely chosen, delivered with a casual cruelty that stole the air from my lungs. "Yes, well, the girl has always been desperate for attention. Truth is, her success comes from the opportunities I provided. Private schools, college connections, the fundamental understanding of business I instilled in all my children. The car is just her way of showing she's finally applying what I taught her. The casual erasure of my accomplishments, the audacious rewriting of my hard-fought independence as somehow stemming from his influence, when he'd offered nothing but criticism and doubt, sent a shock of anger through me, so intense I nearly dropped my glass. The conversation continued, father describing how he'd always pushed Emily harder than the others because she needed that extra discipline. Painting himself as the architect of achievements, he'd actively dismissed, effectively twisting the narrative to serve his own fragile ego. I retreated before being discovered, my anger hot and volatile, turning into a cold, clarifying fury. In the main hallway, David intercepted me, his expression uncharacteristically serious, devoid of his usual golden boy charm. "Emily," a word he said, his voice low, guiding me toward a quiet corner near Mother's prized orchid display. "Dad mentioned you've been asking Mother strange questions about her college years. What exactly are you digging for?" His directness caught me off guard. In truth, after the DNA test, I had casually inquired about Mother's life before marriage, fishing for clues about possible relationships, but I'd thought my questions sufficiently subtle. "Just getting to know her better," I replied carefully, feigning innocence. Women in her generation didn't get many opportunities to build their own identities before marriage and children. David studied me with our father's analytical gaze, the family resemblance striking in ways that now felt like further evidence of my exclusion, my otherness. "Look, whatever you're doing, whatever point you're trying to make with extravagant gifts and probing questions, just stop," he said, his voice laced with condescension. "The family has a certain order, a harmony. Don't disrupt that with whatever crisis you're manufacturing." His words, his tone, his very posture were such a perfect echo of father's, so perfectly dismissive that I almost laughed at the absurdity. "Harmony, is that what you call this toxic hierarchy? This system where one person's accomplishments are celebrated while another's are undermined?" I retorted, my voice rising slightly. "I'm not manufacturing anything, David. I'm just finally seeing clearly." He stepped closer, lowering his voice further to avoid attention. "Dad has built everything we have. The Johnson name means something because of him. Your fancy job in New York, your trendy apartment. It all stems from the foundation he created. Show some respect and gratitude for once." Before I could respond, our cousin Rachel approached, seeming to sense the palpable tension radiating between us. "Everything okay over here? Aunt Olivia's looking for both of you. I think dinner is about to be announced." David plastered on his public smile, the perfect son persona slipping seamlessly back into place. "Just catching up with my little sister. Business talk. Nothing important." As he walked away, Rachel touched my arm gently. "You know, my mom always says your father plays favorites like it's an Olympic sport he's determined to medal in," she confided quietly, her eyes full of empathy. "For what it's worth, I think what you've accomplished on your own is pretty incredible." Her quiet, unexpected support, a rare glimpse of genuine kindness in this suffocating family theater, nearly broke my carefully maintained composure. I'd spent so many years convincing myself that the problem was my perception, not reality, that having someone else acknowledge the dynamic felt paradoxically both validating and devastating. The dinner bell chimed Mother's signal for everyone to begin moving toward the formal dining room. I lingered behind my fingers, brushing the outline of the envelope in my purse, weighing options, consequences, and countless potential scenarios. Part of me, the bruised and battered part, wanted to leave immediately, to withdraw from this charade of family unity, to protect myself from the inevitable wounds the evening would inflict. But a stronger, perhaps more masochistic part refused to retreat. It was determined to see this through, to finally confront the lifetime of rejection with the undeniable physical evidence of its root cause. I checked the envelope one final time, confirming the test results remained safely sealed inside. Then I straightened my shoulders, took a deep, fortifying breath, and moved toward the dining room, steeling myself for the performance ahead. The Johnson formal dining room had always struck me as a perfect chilling metaphor for our family. With its imposing mahogany table capable of seating 20 people, it somehow still felt coldly impersonal, echoing with unspoken words and unacknowledged truths. The ancestral portraits, their eyes following you from the walls, seemed to watch judgmentally, their silent gazes adding to the oppressive atmosphere. And the elaborate place settings, each piece of crystal and silver meticulously arranged, prioritized appearance over comfort, just like everything else in my father's carefully constructed world. Mother had, as usual, outdone herself with the table arrangements. Crystal glasses caught the light from the massive chandeliers, scattering prisms of color across the polished surface. Fresh flower centerpieces were spaced precisely, their fragrant blooms a fleeting, deceptive beauty. And name cards, inscribed in perfect calligraphy, assigned each guest their predetermined position in the family hierarchy, a visible representation of their social standing and perceived worth. I found my card predictably far down the table, seated between cousin Rachel's husband, whom I'd met perhaps twice, and one of father's younger, less significant business associates. Safely distanced, of course, from any meaningful conversation or direct interaction with the inner circle. David and his family occupied the prime positions near father at the head of the table, basking in his reflected glory, while Taylor and her husband served as buffers, gracefully bridging the gap between the inner sanctum and the lesser relations. Mother sat at the opposite end, her position a perfect illustration of her complex role in the family, technically equal as the matriarch, yet separated by the vast expanse of the table, connected yet perpetually distant. The first course arrived with military precision hired waitstaff, placing delicate appetizers of seared scallops with microgreens before each guest, simultaneously a choreographed ballet of service. Father rose, wineglass in hand, commanding immediate silence without requiring a single word, his public persona polished to a glossy, impenetrable shine. "Welcome, family and friends, to our annual reunion," he began, his voice resonating with that practiced charm he reserved for public performances. "Each year I'm reminded how fortunate I am to have built not just a successful business, but a legacy embodied by my family." His gaze swept proudly over David, who nodded appreciatively, a faint, self-satisfied smile playing on his lips. Then to Taylor, who smiled dearly, her eyes crinkling with warmth. His gaze then slid past me as if I occupied the same visual plane as the wallpaper, an invisible presence in his grand pronouncement. "A special welcome to the Peterson Group joining us this year," he continued, acknowledging his business associates with a knowing wink. "When surrounded by success, one naturally attracts more of the same." The toast continued, father highlighting David's recent business expansion, Taylor's community board appointment, and ending with a pointed comment that family success comes from embracing proven pathways, rather than unnecessarily challenging traditions. His eyes finally landed briefly on me with unmistakable meaning, the veiled criticism perfectly clear. As the meal progressed through 5 elaborate courses, father directed the conversation with subtle cues and direct questions, ensuring topics remained within his preferred domains. Real estate markets, local politics, where he held considerable influence, and occasional sports discussions, that inevitably highlighted David's former athletic achievements. When Mother gently attempted to mention my recent promotion during a lull in conversation, Father smoothly intercepted speaking over her as if she hadn't spoken at all. Speaking of financial markets, Henry, what's your take on the Fed's latest signals? Effectively erasing her effort without acknowledging it had even occurred. By the fish course, the familiar insidious pattern had fully emerged, a dance I knew intimately. Father periodically lobbed pointed questions in my direction, each one meticulously designed to undermine, rather than engage, to diminish, rather than acknowledge. Emily, your firm handles primarily domestic investments, correct? Limiting, isn't it, given the global expansion opportunities? Or, I understand your promotion came after the Davidson account. Fortunate timing that David was able to introduce you to William Davidson at last year's charity gala. Each comment was carefully constructed to reframe any success I might claim as either limited in scope or worse, dependent on family connections I had actively avoided using. I maintained the pleasant professional demeanor I'd perfected in hostile boardrooms, refusing to show the emotional reaction he seemed so determined to provoke. Actually, Father, our international division integrated my risk assessment model last quarter, and the Davidson account came through a blind pitch competition, no introductions involved. I corrected my voice light, carefully devoid of emotion, though I noticed Taylor's sympathetic wince at each exchange. It was the familiar family dance, painful in its predictability. The main course arrived, an unnecessarily elaborate beef Wellington that required all attention for several minutes, providing a brief welcome respite from the conversational minefield. Father used the opportunity to open another bottle of prohibitively expensive wine, his consumption steadily increasing throughout the meal, a concerning pattern that Mother tracked with nervous glances. David leaned over to mutter something in Father's ear, receiving a dismissive wave in response. As coffee and dessert were served, Father's attention swung back in my direction, the alcohol having eroded what minimal filters he typically maintained. Emily, Robert tells me you're still single, commented Mrs. Peterson with well-meaning interest, her eyes softening. Such a beautiful, accomplished young woman. The men in New York must be intimidated. Before I could formulate a polite response about prioritizing career advancement, Father interjected, his voice thick with a mock concern that fooled no one. Emily has always been focused on proving something rather than building something, he said, swirling his bourbon contemplatively. Some people chase accomplishments to fill other voids. Family requires compromise, something the Johnson women have traditionally understood better than she has. The casual cruelty landed with practiced precision, implying my professional success was merely compensation for personal failure, rather than an achievement in its own right. Mother's sharp intake of breath was audible even from my distant table position. Robert, she began with an uncharacteristic firmness that surprised me, but he continued as if she hadn't spoken. Perhaps if Emily had shown more interest in suitable matches I introduced over the years, rather than dismissing them as boring or conventional, she wouldn't be facing her 30s alone. Each word was carefully selected for maximum impact, the public dissection of my personal choices presented as paternal concern, rather than the hostile calculated critique it truly was. The familiar pressure built behind my eyes, the childhood urge to flee from the table, to simply disappear, fighting against my adult determination to maintain dignity. I took a measured sip of water, noting with detached interest that my hand remained steady, despite the emotional turbulence beneath. I appreciate your concern for my personal fulfillment, Father, I responded evenly, drawing on every negotiation technique I'd ever learned, every skill I'd honed in high-stakes financial meetings. But as you've often emphasized, Johnson focus on results, and my results speak for themselves. A tense silence fell over the table. Relatives who had witnessed similar exchanges over the years studiously examined their dessert plates, suddenly fascinated by patterns in the porcelain. Father's business associates shifted uncomfortably, suddenly very interested in the architectural details of the ceiling. The pressure in my chest expanded with each heartbeat, the culmination of a lifetime of these moments. These public humiliations thinly disguised as family concern, these careful erasures of my personhood and achievements. The envelope in my purse seemed to pulse with potential energy, a nuclear option I had promised myself, and Taylor I wouldn't deploy, yet felt increasingly compelled to unleash. As waitstaff cleared dessert plates, I realized with perfect clarity that the current path was unsustainable. continuing to seek approval from a man genetically programmed to withhold it was a form of self-destruction. I could no longer afford a corrosive pursuit that had devoured too much of my life. As coffee cups were being refilled and brandy offered to conclude the elaborate meal, Father pushed his chair back slightly, a signal universally understood by the gathered family as preparation for one of his impromptu speeches, a tradition that had evolved over years of Johnson gatherings. The anticipatory silence fell immediately, conversations halting mid-sentence, silverware carefully placed down, all attention reflexively turning toward the patriarch. Father stood, brandy snifter in hand, his expression taking on the benevolent authority he reserved for these moments of public performance. Before we dispersed to the garden for our annual family photograph, he began, his voice carrying that particular timbre of someone accustomed to commanding rooms to holding court. I'd like to take a moment to express my pride in what the Johnson family continues to build together. He gestured expansively, including the business associates as honorary members of this supposed dynasty, this carefully constructed legacy. A family is much like a business enterprise, requiring vision, leadership, and participants who understand their roles in creating collective success. His gaze swept the table in that practiced way of appearing to make eye contact with everyone while actually connecting with no one. As I look around this table, I'm reminded of how fortunate I am to have children who contribute to the family legacy in meaningful ways. He turned toward David, raising his glass slightly. David, your business acumen continues to impress not just me, but the entire Boston development community. The Riverside Project represents exactly the kind of bold, forward-thinking approach that distinguishes Johnson projects from lesser ventures. You've not only embraced the lessons I've taught you, but you've elevated them. David nodded with practiced humility that barely concealed his profound satisfaction. The golden child receiving his expected, well-deserved due. Father then shifted toward Taylor, his expression warming further, a genuine tenderness softening his features. And Taylor, your grace in balancing family responsibilities with community leadership shows remarkable maturity. Your work with the Children's Hospital Board has brought genuine prestige to the Johnson name, reminding us all that true success includes giving back. Your mother and I couldn't be prouder of the family you're raising and the values you represent. Taylor's smile was genuine, if slightly uncomfortable with the direct spotlight, always more comfortable facilitating others' recognition than receiving her own. I braced myself for what would inevitably come next, the careful omission, the pointed silence, where my name should be the practiced technique of praise by exclusion that would communicate volumes to everyone present without requiring explicit criticism. What happened instead was somehow worse. Father's gaze finally landed on me, the slight narrowing of his eyes betraying the calculated nature of what would follow, the deliberate cruelty masked as thoughtful reflection. As I reflect on my children's accomplishments, he continued, his voice modulating to what others might mistake for thoughtfulness, rather than the prelude to an attack it actually signaled. He took a deliberate sip of brandy, the theatrical pause allowing the tension to build to become almost unbearable. I'm struck by how differently success can be defined. I'm proud of all my children, he announced, raising his glass higher, and for a suspended, agonizing moment, I felt a ridiculous flutter of hope, a foolish, childlike optimism that refused to die. It was quickly, brutally extinguished by his continuation, except for the loser sitting at the table. The words landed with precision cruelty, a direct hit to the core of my being, followed by a beat of shocked silence, so profound it felt like the world had stopped spinning. Then uncertain laughter rippled through the guests, most assuming this must be some inside family joke, a playful barb, rather than the public evisceration it actually was. I felt blood rush to my face, a hot, searing flush, then drain away completely, leaving a cold, terrifying numbness in its wake, as every eye at the table, every single one, turned toward me. Their expressions ranged from acute embarrassment to profound pity to morbid voyeuristic curiosity. Father continued, his voice unaffected, as if he'd made a mild joke about the weather. Some people measure success by titles and salaries, by superficial achievements that look impressive on paper, but lack substance and staying power. His gaze, icy and unwavering, was fixed on me. True success comes from continuing family traditions, from building upon foundations rather than constantly seeking to prove individual worth at the expense of collective strength. The deliberate vagueness of some people fooled no one. The target of his remarks was crystalline in its clarity, undeniable in its specificity. Mother's face had gone completely white, her knuckles bloodless around her napkin, while David looked smugly satisfied, a faint, almost imperceptible smirk playing on his lips. Taylor, on the other hand, was openly mortified, her eyes wide with dismay. Cousin Rachel reached across her husband to touch my arm in silent support. Her gesture a small anchor in the tumultuous storm, but I barely registered it. My entire consciousness narrowed to a pinpoint focus on the man at the head of the table, the man who had just confirmed in the cruelest possible way what the DNA test had already told me, that I was fundamentally separate, irrevocably other, not truly part of this family in his eyes. For 20 seconds that stretched like hours, I remained frozen, experiencing the physical sensations of humiliation with a chilling, almost clinical detachment. The burning face, the constricted throat, the accelerated heartbeat, the primal fight-or-flight response flooding my system with adrenaline. A lifetime of similar moments flashed through my consciousness, a continual slideshow of public corrections, subtle undermining achievements reframed as failures, each building upon the last, to create the summative message that I was fundamentally insufficient, unworthy of the name I carried. The name that genetic science had recently confirmed wasn't actually mine to claim. As Father concluded his speech with some platitude about family unity that rang hollow after his pointed, brutal exclusion, something shifted irrevocably within me. A final thread, tenuous and stretched thin for decades, severed, dissolving between the desperate child seeking approval and the adult woman who, in that singular, agonizing moment, suddenly saw with perfect clarity the utter futility of that lifelong quest. The weight of the envelope in my purse, which had been a heavy burden, transformed in that instant into liberation. Its contents were no longer a shameful secret, a potential weapon of last resort, but a key unlocking the prison of false expectations I'd occupied my entire life. The room remained suspended in uncomfortable tension, waiting for my reaction, perhaps expecting tears or a hasty, tearful exit, as had happened in previous years. The predictable, familiar conclusion to the familiar family drama. Instead, a strange, profound calm descended upon me, a chilling clarity of purpose, crystallizing around the decision that had perhaps been inevitable from the moment the test results arrived. Without fully planning the action, my body seemed to move on its own accord. I found myself standing the movement so smooth and deliberate that it commanded immediate attention. Conversations halted mid-sentence, silverware clattered, and all eyes, every single one, turned toward me with expressions ranging from curiosity to apprehension, the latter primarily from those who had witnessed previous Johnson family confrontations. My champagne glass remained on the table deliberately, not raised, the symbolism of my refusal to toast unmistakable. I smoothed my dress with steady hands, surprising myself with the absolute calm that had replaced the earlier turmoil, as if I'd passed through a violent storm into its perfectly peaceful eye. Thank you, Father, for that illuminating speech. I began, my voice carrying clearly without effort, the professional tone I'd perfected in boardrooms serving me well in this unexpected public moment of truth. I've spent 32 years trying to earn approval that was never going to be granted, measuring myself against standards that mysteriously shifted whenever I approached meeting them. I paused, my gaze sweeping the room, holding everyone captive. Today, I finally understand why. The room had gone completely still, the kind of weighted silence that precedes truly significant, irreversible moments. Mother's face was a mask of alarm, her eyes wide with a dawning horror, while Father's expression darkened with the dawning recognition that this script wasn't following his expected pattern. For those keeping score, I continued, my voice infused with a deliberate lightness that belied the monumental magnitude of what was coming. I graduated top of my class from Cornell, built a career without family connections, and recently became the youngest senior investment strategist in my firm's history. I allowed my gaze to sweep the table, establishing brief eye contact with several relatives who nodded slightly in acknowledgement, their expressions a mixture of sympathy and awe, before returning my unwavering attention to Father. By most objective measures, hardly the definition of a loser, wouldn't you agree? But success in Robert Johnson's world has never been about objective achievement, has it? I challenged, my voice cutting through the silence. It's about conformity to his specific vision, about reflecting glory back upon him, rather than creating one's own light. I reached for my purse with deliberate, unhurried calm, acutely aware that every movement, every gesture was being closely observed. The unusual spectacle of the compliant middle child finally breaking rank, too compelling to ignore. "I bought you a car worth more than most people make in a year," I said directly to father, whose face had settled into the cold, impenetrable mask he wore when business negotiations weren't proceeding to his advantage. "Not because you needed it or even particularly deserved it, but because I still harbored the childish hope that a grand enough gesture might finally bridge whatever mysterious gap has existed between us my entire life." From my purse, I withdrew the envelope containing the paternity test results, the paper now seeming almost mundane, flimsy even considering the earth-shattering weight of the information it contained. "For 3 decades, I've blamed myself for your inability to show me the same affection you show David and Taylor. I've twisted myself into countless shapes, trying to become whatever would finally earn your approval, never understanding that the problem wasn't in my actions, but in my DNA." A collective intake of breath circled the table, a gasp that rippled through the room as the profound implication of my words registered sinking into the consciousness of every single guest. Mother's face drained of any remaining color, her hand flying to her mouth, while David straightened with sudden stark alertness, his eyes wide with disbelief and a flicker of something akin to fear. I placed the envelope precisely in the center of the table, my movements measured and deliberate, each gesture imbued with a finality that brooked no argument. "For you, Dad," I said, with quiet, devastating finality infusing the paternal title with all the irony and bitter truth the moment deserved. Without waiting for a response, without a backward glance, I turned and walked from the dining room, my back straight, my pace unhurried, preserving the dignity that had been systematically stripped from me throughout the evening. The shocked silence held stretched taut until I reached the foyer, followed by the immediate explosive eruption of multiple questions overlapping into an unintelligible cacophony of noise. I continued outside without hesitation, the cool evening air, a welcome balm against my flushed skin, a gentle caress after the oppressive heat of the dining room. The path to the driveway was illuminated by decorative lanterns that cast soft, inviting pools of light in the gathering dusk, creating an illusion of peace that sharply contrasted with the turmoil I'd just unleashed. The Mercedes sat where Father had positioned it for maximum visibility, its gleaming black paintwork reflecting the house lights, a silent, elegant symbol of everything I'd been trying to purchase with money that should have been invested in my own peace, my own future instead. The decision to take it wasn't conscious so much as inevitable, a natural flowing extension of the liberation I felt. My hand found the spare key fob I'd kept in my purse, the remote unlock, responding with a gentle chirp that seemed inappropriately cheerful, for the moment a little trill of triumph. I slid into the driver's seat, the supple leather interior still carrying the faint intoxicating scent of new car mixed with the lingering trace of Father's cologne, an olfactory reminder of his brief undeserved possession that would soon fade just like his hold on me. The engine purred to life with expensive precision, a deep resonant rumble, the dashboard illuminating with welcome lights, as if nothing momentous had occurred, as if this were simply another drive, rather than a definitive, irrevocable break with 32 years of emotional servitude. As I reversed slowly down the driveway, my gaze fixed on the house, I caught a glimpse of the front door flying open. Father's figure was framed in the light silhouetted against the brightly lit interior, one hand clutching what appeared to be the opened envelope, the damning test results. His mouth was open in what might have been my name, a primal scream, but it was lost beneath the gentle, luxurious rumble of the German-engineered engine, a symphony of freedom. The symmetry struck me with a powerful, almost poetic force as I accelerated away the luxury car he had showcased to his associates, while minimizing my contribution now physically removed, just as he had attempted to minimize my existence for 3 decades. Both acts of erasure meeting in perfect narrative balance, a reclaiming of what was rightfully mine, both material and emotional. The realization solidified what had been intuitive action into conscious, unwavering decision. The reclamation of the gift paralleling the reclamation of self-worth I was simultaneously undertaking. Both were unburdened by expectations of gratitude that had never been forthcoming, never truly deserved. In the rearview mirror, the Johnson estate receded, growing smaller with each passing second, its grandeur diminishing with distance, just as its emotional hold on me weakened with each rotation of the wheels, carrying me away. The lightness spreading through my chest wasn't happiness exactly. It was too complex, too bittersweet for such a simple singular label. But rather it was the unfamiliar exhilarating sensation of freedom of choices suddenly unconstrained by the oppressive gravitational pull of paternal approval that had distorted my orbit for as long as I could remember. The Mercedes responded with quiet precision as I navigated away from the neighborhood of my childhood, each turn creating further distance between the person I had been 30 minutes ago and whoever I was becoming now. I made it almost to the highway entrance before the first call came through on my cell phone. Taylor's name flashed on the dashboard display, followed in rapid succession by David, then mother, and several cousins. The digital evidence of the chaos I had left in my wake, a digital aftermath of the explosion. I silenced the ringer, but didn't turn the phone off completely. Some part of me, morbid and curious, needed to witness the fallout, even if I wasn't ready to engage with it directly. As I merged onto the highway, headed toward Boston proper, rather than back to New York, I allowed myself a single final glance in the rearview mirror. Just as a male figure I recognized as my father rushed into the street behind me, his normally composed, imperious face contorted in an expression I'd never seen before, something beyond anger into territory I couldn't immediately identify. Pure, unadulterated primal rage, mixed with perhaps utter defeat. The distance was too great to hear his voice, but I didn't need audio to recognize the silent scream from his body language alone. His arms raised overhead in a gesture of such raw primal emotion that it momentarily rendered him unrecognizable as the controlled patriarch who had engineered decades of emotional manipulation. The image burned into my memory as I accelerated away, a visual representation of the seismic shift that had just occurred, the carefully constructed family narrative cracked beyond repair by 3 pages of scientific data and 1 moment of absolute, unwavering clarity. By the time I checked into a downtown Boston hotel 30 minutes later, my phone displayed 17 missed calls and 29 text messages, the digital equivalent of the explosion I had detonated before walking away. I placed the room key on the desk, kicked off my heels, and finally allowed myself the luxury of reviewing the communications, starting with Taylor's texts. They progressed from confused, "What just happened? What was in that envelope?" to concerned, "Liz, please call me, everyone's freaking out," to urgent, frantic information. "Dad is saying insane things. Mom locked herself in her room. David is threatening legal action about the car." Mother's voice messages began composed, gentle pleas. "Emily, please call home when you get a chance," rapidly deteriorating to her 5th message, where her voice cracked thick with raw emotion. "The test can't be right. There must be some mistake. Please come back so we can discuss this as a family." David had limited himself to 2 texts, both terse, both threatening legal action if I didn't return Dad's property immediately and retract your disgusting accusations. The stark contrast between my siblings' responses was unsurprising, their reactions perfectly aligned with the roles they'd always played in the suffocating family dynamic. I sat on the edge of the hotel bed, phone in hand, the physical and emotional distance from the reunion already allowing me to process events with surprising, almost detached clarity. The paternity test had merely confirmed what some deep intuitive part of me had perhaps always known, that Robert Johnson wasn't my biological father, that the inexplicable emotional distance he'd maintained throughout my life stemmed from a secret knowledge he'd carried but never acknowledged. I had obtained the test on impulse after discovering through a recreational genetic testing service that my supposed paternal genetic markers didn't align. The initial shock had given way to a strange, almost liberating sense of explanation for a lifetime of felt otherness within my own family. Now that the information was public, the carefully maintained family image was disintegrating in real time, decades of pretense collapsing under the undeniable weight of scientific fact. The most revealing response came nearly 2 hours later, after I had showered and changed into clothes from the overnight bag I'd packed. A prescient preparation in case the reunion became unbearable. My phone rang with Taylor's number, and something deep within me needed to hear at least one family member's voice to confirm that the earthquake I'd triggered had actually occurred in the external world, and not just within the confines of my own consciousness. Liz Taylor's voice was hushed, suggesting she was calling from somewhere private within the house, still filled with the lingering echoes of extended family. "Are you okay? Where are you, Kartine?" The genuine concern in her tone, the sheer relief at hearing her voice nearly undid my hard-won composure. "I'm safe," I answered non-committally, my voice still a little shaky. "What's happening there?" She exhaled heavily, a long, drawn-out sigh. "Chaos, complete meltdown. After you left, Dad opened the envelope at the table in front of everyone, read it for like 30 seconds, then started shouting for Mom. She took one look at it and went completely white. They disappeared into his study for maybe 10 minutes, while everyone just sat there in shocked silence. And then Dad came storming out looking for you, saw the car was gone, and just lost it completely. I've never seen him like that, Liz. Never." Her clinical description of events, though shocking, paradoxically helped me maintain emotional distance, treating the situation almost like a business case study rather than the implosion of my actual life. "And Mother?" I asked, dreading but needing to know. "She's locked herself in their bedroom. Won't talk to anyone, not even David." The guests all left pretty quickly after that, as you can imagine. Dad's been making phone calls in his study for the last hour, and David is talking about some kind of injunction about the car, which honestly seems like the least important issue right now. She paused, lowering her voice further, almost to a whisper. "Liz, is it true? The test results? Are they real?" The question carried no judgment, only a genuine aching desire to understand, so characteristic of Taylor's mediating, compassionate nature. "Yes," I confirmed, simply, the word solid and unyielding. "I had it done after a genetic service flagged inconsistencies. Robert Johnson is not my biological father." Saying the words aloud to a family member, hearing them spoken into the external world, made them suddenly viscerally real in a way that privately knowing hadn't. "Do you know who is?" she asked softly, her voice still filled with quiet curiosity. "The test doesn't identify, that only confirms the negative match with the sample I provided from Father's hairbrush," I explained, finding the technical details easier to discuss than the raw emotional implications. "But given the timing and Mother's reaction, I'm guessing it was someone from before she married Father." Taylor was quiet for a moment, absorbing the information. Then she asked the question that revealed she understood the situation with her usual emotional intelligence, cutting straight to the heart of everything. "How long do you think he's known?" The question cut to the core of everything, the central betrayal, not being the biological truth itself, but the decades of emotional punishment inflicted for a circumstance beyond my control. "His entire life with me," I answered, with a certainty that surprised even myself, a truth that resonated deep within my bones. "It explains everything, Taylor. Every criticism, every comparison, every impossible standard. He wasn't trying to make me better. He was punishing me for existing." The profound, undeniable truth of this assessment settled between us a heavy shared silence, neither of us needing to articulate the countless examples that supported it. The lifetime of slights and dismissals suddenly making perfect, agonizing sense. "I need to go," Taylor said suddenly, her voice tightening. "David is coming upstairs and I don't want him to know we're talking. Just please text me that you're safe wherever you are. And Liz, whatever happens next, I love you exactly the same. This changes nothing between us." Her words delivered with a desperate sincerity lodged in my chest. A warm, unexpected affirmation that cracked the protective numbness I'd maintained since leaving the house. After hanging up, I moved to the hotel window overlooking Boston Harbor, the city lights reflecting on the dark, restless water. The view was simultaneously familiar and strange, much like my own reflection in the glass. Somewhere in that city was the man who had shaped my childhood, through a calculated absence of affection, and potentially also the unknown man, whose genetic material I carried. The profound symmetry of these two fathers, one present but emotionally absent, one completely unknown but biologically connected, created a strange sense of balance, as if the universe had finally provided explanation for the perpetual sense of misalignment I'd carried throughout my life. As midnight approached, a final text arrived from an unexpected source, Mother's private number rarely used for direct communication. "I never meant for you to find out this way. It wasn't an affair. There was someone before your father in college. When I discovered I was pregnant, your father offered to marry me anyway to give you his name. Please believe he tried to love you as his own. Some men simply cannot separate their feelings from biology. I failed you both by pretending the truth didn't matter, Can we meet tomorrow? Just us. There's so much you deserve to know. The message confirmed what I had already intuited, but added layers of complexity. I hadn't considered casting my father simultaneously as both villain and, strangely, a victim of his own profound limitations. My mother, too, appeared as both deceiver and a trapped young woman, making impossible choices in an era far less forgiving than our own. I placed the phone on the nightstand without responding, emotional exhaustion, finally overtaking the surge of adrenaline that had carried me through the evening. Tomorrow would require decisions about how much truth I wanted, how much connection I could salvage, or was even worth salvaging, and what shape my life would take now that the central organizing principle of earning paternal approval had been definitively, irrevocably removed. For tonight, I allowed myself the luxurious oblivion of emotional shutdown of dreamless sleep, untroubled by the lifetime of questioning that had preceded this day of answers. The week following what my mind had categorized as the revelation unfolded with the strange, disorienting dual quality of moving both excruciatingly slowly and dizzyingly fast. Each day brought new information that simultaneously clarified and complicated my understanding of my place in the world, a relentless unpacking of long-buried truths. The morning after my dramatic exit, I met Mother at a small, unassuming cafe, far from any family haunts, a place that felt neutral, safe. Her appearance shocked me with its vulnerability. The carefully maintained Johnson matriarch facade, that impenetrable armor of perfection, was completely absent. It was replaced by a woman who looked both older and paradoxically more authentically human than I'd ever seen her, her eyes shadowed with regret. His name was Thomas Keller, she began without preamble, her voice barely a whisper once our coffees arrived, her fingers trembling slightly around the delicate porcelain cup. We met junior year at Wellesley. He was at MIT studying engineering, brilliant, kind, completely wrong for a girl from my background according to my parents. She took a shaky breath. When they discovered our relationship, they forbade it immediately without discussion. 2 months later, I met your father at a charity function, the appropriate match, the one everyone approved of. The story unfolded like a period film, a tragic romance playing out in the muted tones of memory, a young woman pressured to abandon genuine connection for social advancement, discovering her pregnancy only after the relationship had been forcibly ended. Robert Johnson. Mother explained, her eyes focused on some middle distance, where the past still vividly lived, offered marriage partly from genuine affection and partly from a calculated assessment of how Olivia's family connections would benefit his burgeoning business ambitions. He promised to raise you as his own, and I believe he truly intended to keep that promise. Her voice caught a flicker of pain crossing her face. But from the moment you were born, you had Thomas's eyes, his expressions, his way of questioning everything rather than simply accepting what was told to you. Robert tried in his way, but every time he looked at you, he saw another man's child, physical proof of my life before him. The revelations continued over 3 painstaking hours, a torrent of details about a history I'd never suspected unfolding, with painful clarity, explaining finally the insidious family dynamic that had shaped my entire existence. My biological father, Thomas Keller, had never known about me. He had moved to California after graduation, built a successful engineering firm, married, and had 3 children who were astonishingly my half-siblings. Mother had tracked his life from afar, through alumni newsletters and in recent years social media, a quiet, hidden vigil. But she had never contacted him, honoring the desperate promise made to Robert that the past would remain buried, that I would be a Johnson in name, if not in blood. By our 3rd coffee, we had progressed to the most difficult question, the one that had festered in my heart for decades. Why didn't you ever protect me? I asked, the accumulated hurt of decades compressing into this single raw query. You saw how he treated me compared to David and Taylor. You watched him systematically undermine every achievement, every attempt to earn his approval. How could you let that continue for 30 years? Her face crumpled with a grief so raw, so profound, it momentarily overrode my anger, dissolving into a silent torrent of tears. I failed you. She acknowledged no excuses, offered no justifications, just a simple, devastating confession. Each time I considered telling you the truth, revealing why he couldn't give you what you deserved, the moment seemed wrong, the potential damage too great. Then time passed, and the lie grew larger, harder to correct. I told myself you were strong, resilient, that you were building a life independent of his approval. I didn't realize until yesterday how much that pursuit still drove you. The conversation ended with no neat resolution, no magic balm to heal decades of wounds, only the difficult, painful beginning of a more honest relationship that would require years to rebuild on a foundation of hard-won truth. The following day brought another seismic shift when I received an email from Thomas Keller, my biological father. I had sent him a message after confirming his identity through public records, a cautious tentative reach across the chasm of unknown years. His reply was cautious, polite, but infused with a palpable kindness. He expressed shock at learning of my existence, requesting time to process this monumental information, but also conveyed a genuine interest in connecting when he had absorbed the bewildering reality of a daughter he'd never known existed. "I see from your email signature that you work in finance in New York," he wrote in his initial response. "Ironically, I'll be in Manhattan next month for a conference. Perhaps we could meet for coffee if you feel comfortable doing so." The simple acknowledgement of my professional identity without qualification or comparison, without a hint of judgment, operated like a balm on raw emotional wounds. The neutral respect of his tone suggested possibilities for connection untainted by the complex, poisonous Johnson history. While these intensely personal earthquakes reshuffled my understanding of family and identity, the professional world continued turning with pragmatic indifference to my existential crisis. My boss called midweek with questions about a client presentation, the mundane normalcy of work discussions, providing surprising comfort amid the personal chaos. "The Robertson account needs your risk assessment model explained in person," she informed me, her voice brisk and professional. "They're specifically requesting you by name, Emily. Your reputation is growing." The acknowledgement of my professional value, entirely independent of any family connections or approval, reinforced what should have been obvious all along, that my worth existed separate from the Johnson name, or his approval anchored instead in abilities and character entirely my own. Robert made his first direct contact 6 days after the reunion, not personally, but through his attorney, a coldly formal letter requesting the immediate return of the Mercedes and threatening legal action regarding defamatory statements made in public regarding paternity. The stark, chilling contrast between this response and Thomas's cautious but humane email crystallized everything I needed to know about both men. Genetics, I realized, suddenly seemed far less relevant than character in determining true parentage. I instructed my own attorney to arrange the return of the vehicle, while making clear that DNA evidence was by definition not defamatory. David maintained radio silence, his loyalty to father unsurprising given their genuine biological connection and deeply shared worldview. Taylor, however, called daily a constant comforting presence in the swirling aftermath of chaos. Our relationship, forged in the crucible of this shared trauma, deepened through honest, vulnerable conversations about family dynamics we'd both observed, but never previously discussed openly. "He's been controlling the narrative our entire lives," she observed during one late-night call, her voice quiet but firm, "making us compete for approval that was never equally available. I benefited from that system, but I always saw how it hurt you. I'm sorry I didn't stand up for you more." Her acknowledgement, her quiet, unwavering validation of my experience from someone who had witnessed it firsthand, helped heal wounds I hadn't realized still festered, oddly more powerful than any test result could be. 6 months after the revelation, the landscape of my life had transformed in ways both subtle and profound, a quiet revolution taking root. Weekly therapy sessions became a crucial anchor, helping me patiently untangle the complex, suffocating web of conditional love and performance anxiety that had driven my achievements. Slowly, painstakingly, I learned to recognize genuine accomplishment separate from desperate approval, seeking to celebrate my wins for their intrinsic value, not their potential to impress. My relationship with Mother evolved into something more authentic, stripped bare of pretense. Her careful performance of perfection, that lifelong act, was finally abandoned in favor of honest, sometimes painful conversations about choices, consequences, and the complex, flawed love that had always existed beneath the Johnson family theater. I met Thomas Keller for the first time at a quiet restaurant near Central Park, a discreet oasis in the bustling city. The strange, almost surreal experience of seeing my own expressions and mannerisms mirrored in a man I'd never met was both unsettling and oddly comforting. "You have my mother's analytical mind," he observed over dessert hours, into a conversation that flowed with surprising ease, as if we'd known each other for years. "But that spark when you talk about market patterns, that's apparently from my side." Our relationship developed cautiously, both respectful of its unusual beginning, neither expecting immediate father-daughter closeness, but building connection through shared intellectual interests, and the profound discovery of genetic commonalities that explained lifelong traits I'd never seen reflected in the Johnson family. The final piece of this transformed life mosaic fell into place at Thanksgiving when I accepted Taylor's invitation to dinner at her home rather than the traditional gathering at our parents' estate. Robert had declined to attend when informed of my presence, his continued rejection, now producing more pity than pain, more understanding than anger. His limitations, I realized, were increasingly apparent as my own healing progressed, like cracks appearing in a once imposing wall. "He can't change," Taylor explained as we prepared dessert together, her children playing happily in the next room with her husband. "Not won't, genuinely can't. His entire identity is built around certainties that your existence challenges." The observation carried no judgment, simply a quiet, sorrowful recognition of the immovable reality we'd both accepted. After dinner, Mother called, her voice stronger than I remembered from childhood. The performative perfection replaced by authentic engagement, by profound unconditional love. "I'm proud of you, Emily," she said, simply the words I'd sought from Robert for 3 decades now, freely given by the parent who had always loved me, despite her flaws, despite her past mistakes. "Not for your job or your address or anything you've achieved, though those things are remarkable. I'm proud of who you are. Your resilience, your capacity to build truth from deception. I should have said that every day of your life." The words landed with a healing force, precisely because they came without conditions or qualifications. A pure, unadulterated declaration of love. As I ended the call, looking out at the soft glow of Taylor's home, I realized the most profound truth of this 6-month journey: that family transcended genetics and legal definitions. It comprised instead those who saw you clearly and loved you anyway, who honored your authentic self, rather than demanding the performance of assigned roles. The luxury car I'd purchased as a desperate offering to a father figure who could never truly accept me had been reclaimed and subsequently sold the funds invested in my future, rather than squandered on a losing quest for approval. More importantly, I had reclaimed the emotional energy previously exhausted on that unwinnable quest for validation, redirecting it toward relationships that nourished rather than depleted toward work, undertaken for passion rather than proof of worth toward building a life measured by internal fulfillment rather than external recognition. The journey from that fateful family dinner to this new equilibrium hadn't been linear or simple. Each day brought fresh challenges and occasional setbacks, but the trajectory remained consistently toward healing rather than further damage. Perhaps the most meaningful measure of growth came not from grand revelations, but from quiet Tuesday mornings when I awoke without immediately assessing my worthiness, when accomplishments were celebrated for their intrinsic value rather than their potential to finally earn paternal approval, when life was lived from an authentic foundation rather than performative desperation. As this Thanksgiving evening ended, I realized that while the mystery of my paternity had been solved, the more significant discovery was that its importance had diminished with each step toward self-acceptance. The question of whose blood I carried mattered far less than whose values I chose to embody, whose love I accepted as genuine, whose truth I claimed as my own. Have you ever discovered that your true family isn't always defined by blood? Sometimes the people who should love us unconditionally are the ones who hurt us most deeply. I'd love to read your thoughts in the comments below about how you've created your own chosen family, or stood up to those who couldn't see your worth. If my story resonated with you, please hit that like button, subscribe to hear more journeys of healing, and share with someone who might need to be reminded that their value doesn't depend on anyone else's validation. Thank you for listening, and remember, sometimes taking back your power means walking away from people who never deserved it in the first place.